Sometimes a father will do anything to give his child a better life, even when everyone tells him he's making a terrible mistake. Jonas Merrick was that kind of father, broke, grieving his wife's death, and desperate to start over with his 13-year-old son Owen. When the Ashford Mansion went up for sale at $1, the whole town of Millbrook knew something was wrong. The house had been empty for 30 years after a fire killed a dozen children. But Jonas needed a home, and $1 was all he could afford. The realtor handed him the keys and left quickly. That first night, Jonas found names carved into the bedroom walls, children's names with dates from long ago. His son, Owen, started drawing pictures of the house on fire, though Jonas never told him about the tragedy. What Jonas found hidden in the basement would reveal why no one wanted this house. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, Jonas Merrick had been a different man. He'd owned a modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, worked steady hours at the county water department, and came home each evening to his wife Sarah's warm smile and the sound of Owen practicing violin. Sarah would greet him at the door with flour on her apron from whatever she'd been baking, and Owen would rush to show him his latest drawing or tell him about his day at school. The cancer took all of that away in 18 brutal months. Sarah fought it with everything she had. Chemotherapy that left her weak but never broken, radiation treatments that stole her beautiful auburn hair but never her spirit, experimental drugs that cost them their savings but never dimmed her hope. Through it all, she kept a journal by her bedside, writing letters to Owen for all the birthdays and graduations she might miss. Jonas found those letters after the funeral, each one sealed with a kiss of her favorite lipstick. "Take care of our boy," her final letter had said in her shaky handwriting. "Give him the life we dreamed of, even if I can't be there to see it." But dreams cost money, and Sarah's medical bills had consumed everything. The insurance covered the basics, but the experimental treatments, the private specialists, the hope they desperately purchased month after month, none of that came cheap. Jonas had mortgaged the house twice, maxed out every credit card, borrowed against his pension. When the final bill came due and Sarah was already gone, he had nothing left but debt and a broken 13-year-old son who barely spoke anymore. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in October. Owen was eating cereal at the kitchen table, methodically moving the pieces around his bowl without taking a bite, something he'd done ever since the funeral. The legal document felt heavy in Jonas's hands as he read the familiar words. 30 days to vacate, property to be sold at auction, all personal belongings to be removed. "Dad?" Owen looked up from his untouched breakfast. "Are we moving?" Jonas folded the notice carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "Maybe, son. We'll figure something out." But there wasn't much to figure out. Jonas's credit was destroyed. His savings gone, his job barely covering their basic expenses. Rental applications were denied as soon as landlords ran his background check. His sister in Phoenix had offered them her couch, but Jonas couldn't bear the thought of dragging Owen away from the only town he'd ever known, away from his mother's grave. That's when he saw the classified ad in the Millbrook Gazette, buried between notices for yard sales and lost pets. "Historic mansion for sale, must sell immediately, $1 or best offer, serious inquiries only, $1. Jonas stared at the ad for a long time, reading it over and over. He'd lived in Millbrook his entire life, 43 years, and he knew every house in town. The only mansion that fit the description was the old Ashford place on Elm Street, the one everyone avoided, the one kids dared each other to touch on Halloween, the one that had stood empty since Jonas was Owen's age. The Ashford Mansion. Even in its decaying state, the house commanded attention. Built in 1902 by Edmund Ashford, a wealthy businessman who'd made his fortune in timber, the Gothic revival structure rose 3 stories into the sky, like something from a dark fairy tale. Stone gargoyles perched on the corners of the slate roof, their weathered faces twisted into permanent snarls. Tall, arched windows stared down at the street like empty eyes, most of them boarded up or broken. The wraparound porch sagged under, the weight of 30 years of neglect. Its ornate railings rotted and falling away, but it was still standing. And it was $1. Jonas called the number from a payphone outside the grocery store, not wanting Owen to hear the conversation. The realtor, a nervous-sounding woman named Patricia Mills, seemed almost relieved when he expressed interest. "You're sure you want to see it?" she asked. "I mean, really sure. I have other properties I could show you, much better properties." "I'm sure," Jonas said, watching Owen through the store window as he wandered the cereal aisle. "When can we meet?" Patricia agreed to meet them that afternoon, though she insisted on bringing a partner. "For safety," she explained, though she wouldn't elaborate on what kind of safety she meant. The mansion looked even more imposing up close. As they walked up the cracked front path, Owen stayed close to Jonas's side, his small hand finding his father's. The boy had always been sensitive. Sarah used to say he had an artist's soul, and Jonas could feel him tense as they approached the massive oak door. "Now, I have to tell you," Patricia said, fumbling with an old-fashioned skeleton. This property has some history. There was a fire here in 1994. Some children were hurt." She paused, glancing at Owen. "The house has been difficult to sell since then." "What kind of fire?" Jonas asked. Patricia's partner, a burly man named Carl, spoke up. "The place used to be an orphanage. Fire started in the middle of the night. 12 kids didn't make it out." He looked directly at Jonas. "Folks around here think the place is cursed." Owen's hand tightened in Jonas's. The boy had been drawing more since his mother's death, dark, swirling pictures that seemed to pour out of him onto any piece of paper he could find. Sarah had always encouraged his art, but these new drawings worried Jonas. They were different, somehow more urgent, like Owen was trying to capture something he couldn't put into words. "Cursed houses don't exist," Jonas said firmly, as much for Owen's benefit as his own. "Just old houses with sad stories." The front door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the entire structure. The foyer was grand but gutted. A sweeping staircase dominated the space, its banister carved with intricate roses and thorns. Dust particles danced in the pale afternoon light that filtered through the boarded windows. The air smelled of mildew, old wood, and something else Jonas couldn't identify, something that reminded him of autumn bonfires. "As you can see, it needs some work," Patricia said, her voice echoing in the empty space. "The previous owner did. Some renovations in the 80s, but nothing's been touched since the fire." They walked through room after room of faded grandeur. The dining room still held a massive mahogany table, warped and water-damaged, but solid. The kitchen was a disaster of broken cabinets and rusted appliances, but the bones were good, high. Ceilings, plenty of space, windows that would let in beautiful light once they were uncovered. The library had built-in shelves that reached to the ceiling, most of the books long since removed, but the craftsmanship still evident. It was in one of the upstairs bedrooms that Owen made his discovery. "Dad," he called softly, "look at this." Jonas found his son standing by the far wall, his fingers tracing something carved into the faded wallpaper. As Jonas got closer, he could make out names scratched into the plaster beneath the torn paper. Emma, age 12, Michael, age 9, Sarah, age 7, a dozen names, all with ages. All children. "They were here," Owen whispered, his voice carrying a strange certainty that made Jonas's skin prickle. "They lived here." Patricia appeared in the doorway, saw what they were looking at, and quickly ushered them toward the stairs. "The previous owners left quite a bit behind," she said nervously. "We haven't had time to clear everything out." But Jonas barely heard her. He was watching Owen, who had pulled a small sketchpad from his jacket pocket and was quickly drawing something. When Jonas looked over his shoulder, he saw his son sketching the mansion, but not as it appeared now, broken and empty. Owen was drawing it as it might have looked decades ago, with children's faces in the windows and smoke curling from the chimney, and flames. Owen was drawing flames licking at the edges of the roof. "Son," Jonas said gently, "what are you drawing?" Owen looked up at him with eyes that seemed much older than 13. "I don't know, Dad. It just feels like something I need to draw." 20 minutes later, they stood on the front porch, while Patricia and Carl waited by their car. The realtor held out a single sheet of paper, the deed to the Ashford Mansion, requiring only Jonas's signature and $1. "You're absolutely certain?" Patricia asked one final time. "Because once you sign this, the house is yours. All of it, including its history." Jonas looked down at Owen, who was still sketching in his pad, lost in his own world. They needed a home. Owen needed stability, a place to heal from losing his mother, and Jonas needed to keep his promise to Sarah to give their son the life they'd dreamed of. He signed the deed and handed Patricia a crumpled dollar bill from his wallet. That night, as they lay on sleeping bags in the dusty living room of their new home, Owen showed Jonas his latest drawing. It was the mansion again, but this time the flames were bigger, more detailed, and in the windows of the burning house, Jonas could swear he saw faces, small faces with eyes that seemed to look directly at him. "Dad?" Owen's voice was small in the darkness. "Do you think Mum can see us here?" Jonas pulled his son closer, Sarah's wedding ring still warm on his finger. "I think she can see us wherever we are, Owen, and I think she'd be proud that we found a way to stay together." Outside, the autumn wind rattled the loose shutters of the Ashford Mansion, creating sounds that could have been whispers or could have been just the settling of an old house full of memories. Jonas closed his eyes and tried not to think about the carved names on the bedroom wall, or the way Owen seemed to know things about this place that he shouldn't know. Tomorrow, he would start making this house a home. Tomorrow, he would begin building the life Sarah had wanted for their son. Tonight, he would just hold Owen close and pretend that the sounds in the walls were only the wind. The journal appeared. On the third day, as if the house itself had been waiting to see if Jonas and Owen would stay. Jonas had spent the morning pulling up rotted floorboards in what he'd decided would become Owen's bedroom, one of the smaller chambers on the second floor, away from the room with the carved names. The wood came up easier than expected, decades of moisture having weakened the nails. Underneath, he found the usual detritus of old houses, mouse droppings, scraps of newspaper from the 1980s, a few coins that had slipped through the cracks over the years. But wedged between two floor joists, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow kept it dry, was a small leather journal. The cover was charred around the edges, as if it had survived a fire. When Jonas opened it, the pages crackled with age, but the handwriting inside was still legible, the careful script of a child who had been taught proper penmanship. "My name is Emma Catherine Morrison," the first entry began. "I am 12 years old and I have been at the Ashford home for orphaned children for 3 years now. Mrs. Fletcher says I should keep a diary to practice my writing, but really I think she wants us to write down our thoughts so we don't cause trouble by talking too much." Jonas sat back on his heels, the journal heavy in his hands. Emma, that had been one of the names carved into the bedroom wall. Emma, age 12. He flipped through the pages, reading entries that painted a picture of life in the Ashford home during the early 1990s. Emma wrote about the other children, about lessons and chores and the strict rules Mr. Ashford enforced. She wrote about missing her parents, who had died in a car accident, and about trying to take care of the younger children who cried for their mothers at night. But as the entries progressed through the months, the tone changed. Emma began writing about strange rules that didn't make sense, why the children weren't allowed in certain parts of the house, why Mr. Ashford locked their dormitory doors at night for their safety, why they weren't permitted to write letters to the outside world. "Something is wrong here," one entry read, dated just 2 weeks before the fire. Tommy tried to tell his social worker about the locked doors, but Mr. Ashford said Tommy was lying, and now Tommy isn't allowed visitors anymore. Sarah, the little one, not the grown-up Sarah who comes sometimes, wet her bed again, and Mr. Ashford made her sleep in the basement as punishment. She came back crying and wouldn't say what happened down there. Jonas's blood ran cold. Sarah, there had been a Sarah among the carved names. Sarah, age 7. The final entries were increasingly desperate. Emma wrote about trying to find ways to unlock their dormitory door at night, about the smell of smoke she sometimes detected in the halls, about Mr. Ashford's angry visits to their room when he thought they were asleep. The last entry was dated the night of the fire. I can smell smoke again, stronger this time. I tried to wake up Mr. Ashford, but his room is locked and he won't answer. The little ones are scared. The doorknob to our room is hot to touch. I can hear crackling sounds in the walls. If something happens to us, I want whoever finds this to know that we tried to get out. We tried so hard to get out. The doors were locked from the outside, all of them. Please tell someone what really happened here. Please don't let them say it was an accident. It wasn't an accident. Jonas closed the journal with trembling hands. He looked around the bedroom where he'd found it, Emma's bedroom, where she'd hidden her diary under the floorboards, where she'd carved her name and age into the wall with her fingernails as the fire consumed the house around her. Dad? Jonas spun around to find Owen standing in the doorway, his sketchpad clutched against his chest. His son looked pale, almost translucent in the afternoon light filtering through the dirty windows. Owen, you startled me. What are you doing up here? I was drawing downstairs, but then I heard voices. Children's voices. They were calling my name. Owen stepped into the room, and Jonas noticed he moved with an odd certainty, as if he knew exactly where he was going. They told me you found something important. Who told you that, son? Owen walked to the spot where Jonas had pulled up the floorboards and knelt down, placing his small hand on the exposed joists. Emma, she said you found her diary. He looked up at Jonas with eyes that held knowledge no 13-year-old should possess. She said she's been waiting a long time for someone to read it. A chill ran down Jonas's spine. He hadn't mentioned Emma's name, hadn't told Owen anything about what he'd found in the journal. Owen? How do you know about Emma? His son opened his sketchpad and showed Jonas the page he'd been working on. It was a portrait of a girl, maybe 12 years old, with kind eyes and long braids. At the bottom of the page, Owen had written, Emma Morrison, age 12, in handwriting that looked nothing like his usual scrawl. It looked exactly like the careful script in the journal. She's been trying to tell her story for 30 years, Owen said matter-of-factly, but nobody would listen. The grown-ups who survived all lied about what happened. They said the doors weren't locked. They said the children must have been too scared to get out. But Emma knows the truth. Jonas sat down heavily on the dusty floor, the journal still clutched in his hands. Owen, this is just an old house with a sad history. Sometimes, when we're in a new place, our imaginations can... Dad. Owen's voice was gentle but firm. Look. He pointed to the far wall, and Jonas followed his gaze. The carved names he'd seen earlier were no longer alone. Fresh scratches had appeared in the plaster, not deep gouges like the original names, but light markings that caught the afternoon light. They spelled out a single word, truth. They want people to know what really happened, Owen said. Mr. Ashford locked them in their rooms that night. He started the fire himself, because someone was going to tell about the bad things he did to the children. He thought if they all died, his secrets would die with them. Jonas stared at his son, this boy who had barely spoken since his mother's death, now discussing century-old secrets with the calm certainty of an adult. How do you know all this? They tell me things. When I draw, they show me pictures in my head. Owen flipped through his sketchpad, showing Jonas page after page of detailed drawings. The mansion, as it looked in the 1990s, complete with children, playing in rooms that were now empty, portraits of faces, both young and adult, scenes of daily life in the orphanage that were far too specific to be imagination. And then Owen showed him the newest drawing, still wet with pencil lead. It was the mansion's basement, rendered in careful detail. In the center of the room stood a furnace, old-fashioned and hulking. Around the furnace were scattered what looked like children's belongings, shoes, toys, pieces of clothing, and in the corner, barely visible in Owen's shading, was the outline of a small figure huddled against the wall. "Sarah hid down there when the fire started," Owen explained. "She was only 7. She didn't understand why the door was locked. She waited for someone to come get her, but nobody came." Jonas felt sick. He looked at the journal in his hands, then at his son's drawings, then at the fresh scratches in the wall. Everything Owen was telling him aligned perfectly with what Emma had written in her final entries. "Owen, we should call someone. The police, maybe, or—" "Who would believe us, Dad?" Owen asked. "Who would believe that a 13-year-old boy is talking to ghosts? They'd think I was crazy. They'd think you were crazy for listening to me." He was right, of course. Jonas could imagine trying to explain this to authorities. His son claimed to be receiving messages from children who died 30 years ago, and oh, by the way, he'd found a diary that proved the fire was intentional murder. They'd have Owen in therapy and Jonas under investigation before the day was over. "Then what do we do?" Jonas asked. Owen closed his sketchpad and stood up. "We help them. Emma says there's more evidence hidden in the house. Things Mr. Ashford tried to destroy, but couldn't. If we can find it all, if we can put together the whole story, then maybe people will have to listen." That evening, as Jonas made dinner in their makeshift kitchen, canned soup heated on a camping stove, Owen sat at the warped dining room table, drawing with an intensity Jonas had never seen before. Every few minutes, he would pause, as if listening to something Jonas couldn't hear, then nod and continue sketching. "What are they telling you now?" Jonas asked, setting a bowl of soup in front of his son. "They're showing me where Mr. Ashford hid his papers, the ones that prove he was taking money from the state for children who weren't here anymore." Owen looked up from his drawing. "Dad, I think some of the children tried to escape before the fire, and when they did, Mr. Ashford made sure they couldn't tell anyone what was happening here." Jonas sat down across from Owen, his own soup forgotten. "What do you mean?" "Emma thinks some of the children who ran away never actually left the house." Owen's voice was steady, but Jonas could see the fear in his eyes. "She thinks they're still here, all of them, not just the 12 who died in the fire." As if summoned by Owen's words, a door somewhere in the house slammed shut. Then another, and another. The sounds echoed through the empty rooms like a drumbeat, growing faster and more urgent. The temperature in the dining room dropped so suddenly that Jonas could see his breath misting in the air. Owen didn't seem surprised. He simply put down his pencil and looked toward the staircase. "They want us to find the others," he said quietly. "They want us to tell all their stories, not just Emma's." Jonas reached across the table and took his son's hand. It was ice cold. "Owen, are you afraid?" His son considered the question seriously. "No, Dad, they're not mean. They're just sad. They've been waiting so long for someone to care enough to listen." He squeezed Jonas's hand. "Mom used to say that everyone deserves to have their story told. Remember?" Jonas did remember. Sarah had been working on a freelance article about missing children when her illness got too severe to continue. She'd always believed that every child mattered. Every story deserved to be heard. "She would have helped them," Owen continued. "If she was here, she would have helped them, so we have to do it for her." The door slamming stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The house settled into its usual creaks and sighs, but the air remained cold. Jonas looked around the dining room, at the peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceiling, and wondered what other secrets this place held. "All right," he said finally. "We'll help them, but we do this carefully, Owen. We document everything. We keep each other safe, and if things get too dangerous, we leave. Promise me." Owen nodded solemnly. "I promise, Dad, but I don't think we'll need to leave. I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be." That night, Jonas lay in his sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of the old house settling around them. But mixed in with the usual groans and creaks, he could swear he heard something else, the soft whisper of children's voices, speaking in languages of loss and longing that transcended death itself. In his sleeping bag beside him, Owen drew pictures by flashlight until well past midnight, his hand moving across the paper with the guidance of friends only he could see. The confession letter was hidden behind a false wall in what had once been Edmund Ashford's private study, sealed inside an envelope that bore his initials in gold leaf. Owen led Jonas to it 3 days after they'd found Emma's journal, walking through the mansion's twisted corridors with the confidence of someone who'd lived there all his life. "Mr. Ashford's office was here," Owen said, stopping in front of a room Jonas hadn't explored yet. The door was heavier than the others, made of solid mahogany with brass fittings that had tarnished green with age. "Emma says he used to call children in here when they were bad, but really they weren't bad at all." Inside, the study was a monument to masculine authority, or had been, decades ago. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, its surface scarred and water-stained but still imposing. Built-in bookshelves lined 3 walls, most of the volumes long since removed. The 4th wall was covered in what looked like wood paneling, dark walnut that ran from floor to ceiling. Owen walked straight to a section of paneling near the tall windows and pressed his small hand against it. "Here," he said simply. Jonas examined the area Owen had touched. At first, it looked like solid wood, matching the rest of the wall perfectly. But when he ran his fingers along the edges, he could feel a slight gap, barely visible, but there. He pressed where Owen had pressed, and a section of the panel swung inward with a soft click. Behind the hidden panel was a small compartment, just large enough to hold a few documents. Inside, Jonas found a manila envelope, brittle with age, and a small metal box that rattled when he shook it. The envelope contained a single sheet of letterhead, Edmund Ashford's personal stationery, thick cream paper with his name embossed at the top. The letter was dated 3 days before the fire. "To whoever finds this confession," it began in Ashford's spidery handwriting, "I can no longer bear the weight of what I have done, what I am about to do. The state inspector comes next week, and if she completes her investigation, everything will be revealed. The missing children, the falsified records, the money I took for their care while they lay buried in the basement. I thought I could control the situation, manage the witnesses, but some secrets refused to stay buried." Jonas felt his hands begin to shake as he continued reading. "I never meant for it to go this far. It started small. A child who tried to run away, who I stopped too forcefully. An accident, truly. But when I realized how easy it was to report them as successful runaways, to continue collecting state funds for their care, the temptation became too great to resist. Over the years, 7 children left the Ashford home. In reality, they never left at all. Now the remaining 12 know too much. They've seen too much. Little Emma Morrison has been asking questions about the children who supposedly ran away. She's been writing letters she thinks I don't know about, trying to contact the outside world. Tonight, I will end this problem permanently. The fire will look accidental. Old wiring. Everyone knows these large houses are dangerous. The children will be remembered as tragic victims, not as witnesses to murder. I am a coward and a monster. I know this. But I am also a practical man, and practical men do what they must to survive. By the time this letter is read, it will all be over. Perhaps whoever finds this will understand that sometimes there are no choices left but the terrible ones." The letter was signed with Edmund Ashford's full signature, followed by a postscript that made Jonas's blood run cold. "I have hidden the other evidence in the basement, behind the furnace. If God has any mercy, let the fire consume it all." Jonas set the letter down with trembling hands. Beside him, Owen had opened the metal box and was examining its contents. A collection of small items that looked like children's jewelry and personal effects. "These belong to the 7, Owen said quietly, holding up a tiny silver locket. "The ones who tried to escape. Mr. Ashford kept them as trophies, I think, to remember what he'd done." "Owen, how do you know all this?" His son looked at him. With eyes that held depths, Jonas was only beginning to understand. "They tell me things, not just Emma and the others who died in the fire. The 7 who died before are here too. They've all been waiting together." Jonas sank into Ashford's old chair, the confession letter still gripped in his hand. 19 children. 19 children had died in this house, and the world had only known about 12 of them. "We have to call the police," he said. "This is evidence of mass murder." "Dad." Owen's voice was patient but firm. "Who's going to believe a letter we found hidden in a wall? They'll say we planted it. They'll say we're trying to get attention or money from the tragedy." Owen was right, and Jonas knew it. Even with the physical evidence, their story sounded impossible. A widowed father and his troubled son move into a cursed mansion and suddenly start finding decades-old evidence of child murder. The authorities would be more likely to investigate Jonas than to reopen a 30-year-old case. Then what do we do with this? Before Owen could answer, Jonas heard footsteps in the hallway outside the study, heavy, adult footsteps that definitely weren't Owen's. Jonas grabbed his son's hand, and they both froze, listening. The footsteps stopped directly outside the study door. Jonas motioned for Owen to stay quiet and crept toward the door, Ashford's confession letter still clutched in his hand. Through the old keyhole, he could see a shadow moving in the hallway. Someone was definitely out there. The door handle began to turn. Jonas stepped back, pulling Owen behind him, as the door swung open to reveal an elderly woman with silver hair and kind but worried eyes. She wore a sensible brown coat and carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Oh," she said, stopping short when she saw them. "I'm sorry to startle you. I'm Margaret Hartwell. I live next door." She held up the basket. "I brought some soup and bread. I thought you might need a proper meal." Jonas relaxed slightly, but kept the confession letter behind his back. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm Jonas Merrick, and this is my son, Owen." Mrs. Hartwell stepped into the study, her eyes scanning the room with a familiarity that suggested she'd been here before. "I knew you'd found something," she said quietly. "I could feel it this morning when I was tending my garden. The air around this place changed." "Found something?" Jonas tried to keep his voice casual. Mrs. Hartwell looked directly at him. "Mr. Merrick, I've lived next to this house for 47 years. I was here when it was an orphanage. I was here the night of the fire. And I've been here through every family that's tried to make this place a home since then." She set her basket down on Ashford's desk. "You're not the first to find evidence of what really happened here. But you might be the first with the courage to do something about it." Owen stepped out from behind Jonas. "You know about the children." "I know about all of them," Mrs. Hartwell said softly. "The 12 who died in the fire and the 7 who died before. I was a young teacher then, working at the public school in town. Some of those children were my students before they were placed at the Ashford home." Jonas slowly brought the confession letter out from behind his back. "You know what Edmund Ashford did." Mrs. Hartwell's eyes filled with tears when she saw the letter. "I suspected. God help me, I suspected for years, but I could never prove it. When children would disappear from my classroom, transferred to the home, I'd try to visit them. But Mr. Ashford always had excuses. They were sick, they were being punished, they'd run away." She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. "After the fire, I tried to tell people that something wasn't right about how it happened. But I was just a school teacher, and Edmund Ashford was a respected businessman with connections throughout the county." "What happened to you when you tried to speak up?" Jonas asked. "I lost my job. The school board said I was spreading malicious rumors about a tragic accident. I was blacklisted from teaching anywhere in the county." Mrs. Hartwell's voice grew bitter. The truth has a way of making people uncomfortable, especially when powerful men are involved. Owen had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Mrs. Hartwell, did you know Emma Morrison? The elderly woman's face softened. Emma was one of my brightest students. She loved to write stories, always had her nose in a book. When she was placed at the home after her parents died, I tried to keep in touch with her, but Mr. Ashford said it would be better if she had no contact with her old life. Mrs. Hartwell looked at Owen with sudden intensity. How do you know about Emma, child? Owen glanced at Jonas, who nodded slightly. She talks to me sometimes, her and the others. They want people to know what really happened to them. Instead of looking shocked or concerned, Mrs. Hartwell simply nodded. I always wondered if they'd found peace. I'm glad to know they haven't been forgotten. She turned to Jonas. Mr. Merrick, what you found here, it's important, but it's also dangerous. There are people in this town who have spent 30 years making sure the truth about this place stays buried. What do you mean? Edmund Ashford didn't work alone. The cover-up after the fire involved local officials, police officers, members of the town council. Some of them are still alive, still in positions of power. They won't want this evidence to come to light. Jonas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mansion's supernatural inhabitants. Are you saying we're in danger? I'm saying you should be very careful who you trust. Mrs. Hartwell picked up her basket. But I also think you're the answer to prayers I've been saying for 30 years. Those children deserve justice, and maybe you're the ones who can finally give it to them. She started toward the door, then turned back. Mr. Merrick, there's something else you should know. Your wife, Sarah, she wasn't the first journalist to take an interest in this case. 3 years ago, a reporter from the state capitol came, sniffing around, asking questions about the Ashford fire. He had a car accident on his way out of town. Single vehicle, ran off the road in broad daylight. The sheriff ruled it an accident. Jonas felt the blood drain from his face. You think it wasn't? I think people who ask too many questions about the Ashford fire tend to have bad luck. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes were sad, but determined. But I also think it's time someone with nothing left to lose took up the fight. Just be careful, Mr. Merrick. Be very careful. After she left, Jonas and Owen sat in the study as the afternoon light faded, surrounded by the evidence of crimes that had been hidden for 3 decades. The confession letter lay on the desk between them, along with the box of children's belongings that Edmund Ashford had kept as sick mementos. Dad, Owen said quietly, I think Mrs. Hartwell is right. About the danger, I mean. The children, they keep showing me pictures of men in suits, men who were here after the fire. They're scared of some of them. What kind of pictures? Owen opened his sketchpad to a page Jonas hadn't seen before. It showed several men in official-looking clothing standing outside the burned mansion, but something about their postures and their expressions suggested they weren't there to investigate the tragedy. They were there to manage it. Emma says some of these men are still alive, still important in town. She says they helped Mr. Ashford hide what he did, and they won't want us to tell the truth. Jonas studied the drawing, trying to make out the faces Owen had sketched. They were detailed enough that someone who knew these men might recognize them, but not clear enough for Jonas to identify anyone. Owen, I want you to promise me something. If anything happens to me, if I get hurt or have to go away suddenly, you take all of this evidence and you give it to Mrs. Hartwell. She'll know what to do with it. Nothing's going to happen to you, Dad. Promise me anyway. Owen nodded solemnly. I promise, but Dad, the children say we don't have to do this alone. They say there are other people in town who know the truth, people who've been waiting for someone brave enough to speak up. What other people? I don't know yet. But Emma says when the time is right, they'll find us. As night settled over the mansion, Jonas carefully hid the confession letter and the box of children's belongings in a new location, wrapped in plastic and hidden inside the wall cavity behind the loose baseboard in their makeshift bedroom. If something did happen to him, Owen would know where to find the evidence. But as he sealed up their hiding place, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. not by the gentle spirits of the children. Their presence felt warm and protective, but by something else. Something that had been content to let the mansion stand empty and the secrets stay buried, but was now disturbed by the possibility that the truth might finally come to light. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and making the old house groan. But underneath those familiar sounds, Jonas could have sworn he heard the distant rumble of car engines, circling the property like sharks around wounded prey. The suppressed fire marshal's report was buried in the basement of Millbrook's town, all filed under miscellaneous historical documents in a box that hadn't been opened in decades. Jonas only found it because Owen led him there, the boy's strange connection to the mansion's victims, guiding them through bureaucratic mazes with uncanny precision. "The children say it's in the basement," Owen had told him that morning over breakfast. "In a green box with numbers on it. Emma saw the fire marshal man hide it there after Mr. Ashford's friends talked to him." Jonas had been skeptical. How could a 13-year-old know about documents hidden in government buildings? But desperation made him willing to try anything. They needed more evidence, something official that couldn't be dismissed as fabricated or planted. The town hall was a modest brick building from the 1950s, staffed by 2 part-time clerks who seemed more interested in their coffee and gossip than in helping citizens access public records. When Jonas asked to review historical fire reports, the older clerk, a woman with steel-grey hair and suspicious eyes, looked at him as if he'd requested state secrets. "Fire reports from when?" she asked, not bothering to look up from her romance novel, 1994, The Ashford Mansion Fire. That got her attention. She set down her book and studied Jonas with newfound interest. "You're the fellow who bought that old place, aren't you? I heard someone was foolish enough to take it for $1. "Yes, ma'am. I'm just trying to understand the history of my property." The clerk exchanged a look with her younger colleague, a man who seemed perpetually nervous. "Well, I suppose public records are public records, though I can't imagine why you'd want to dig up old tragedies." She stood up with obvious reluctance. "Follow me." The basement of the town hall was a maze of metal shelving units loaded with file boxes, many of them unlabeled or mislabeled. The air smelled of mildew and old paper, and the fluorescent lights flickered ominously as they made their way through the narrow aisles. "Fire department records should be somewhere around here," the clerk muttered, scanning box labels with the air of someone who hoped not to find what she was looking for. "Though I can't promise everything from that far back is still here. Sometimes old records get lost or destroyed to make room for new files." Jonas noticed Owen had wandered off on his own, moving through the maze of shelves with that same eerie certainty he'd shown at the mansion. The boy stopped in front of a particular section, crouched down, and pointed to a green metal box on the bottom shelf. "Is this it?" Owen called out. The clerk looked flustered. "How did you— That's not where the fire records should be." She hurried over to check the box's label. "This is marked as Miscellaneous Historical Documents, 1990-1995, but I suppose—" She pulled the box from the shelf and set it on a nearby table. "Let me see what's in here." The box contained exactly what Owen had said it would, a collection of documents related to the Ashford Mansion fire, including the official fire marshal's report that had been filed with the state. But underneath that official report, Jonas found something far more interesting, a second report marked confidential, not for public release, written in the same handwriting but telling a completely different story. The official report concluded that the fire had been caused by faulty electrical wiring, that the children's dormitory doors had been unlocked, but the panicked children had been unable to escape due to smoke and confusion. It described the 12 deaths as a tragic accident that could have been prevented with better fire safety measures. The suppressed report painted a very different picture, evidence of accelerant use throughout the building. Jonas read quietly, while the clerk pretended to organize other files nearby. Multiple points of origin suggest arson. Dormitory door locks show signs of having been engaged from the outside. Key found in deceased owner's pocket matches, dormitory door locks. Physical evidence indicates children attempted to break down doors from inside rooms. The suppressed report went on to detail findings that had been omitted from the official version. Scratch marks on the inside of dormitory doors where children had clawed desperately at the wood, burn patterns that suggested the fire had been deliberately set to spread quickly, and most damning of all, evidence of older remains found in the mansion's basement. During excavation of the basement area, the confidential report stated, investigators discovered skeletal remains of at least 7 individuals, all apparently children based on bone development. Remains show signs of trauma consistent with violent death. Due to the condition of the basement after the fire, precise identification is not possible, but evidence suggests these deaths occurred prior to the night of the fire, possibly over a period of several years. Jonas felt sick reading the clinical description of what Edmund Ashford had done. 7 children murdered over the years and hidden in his basement, then 12 more killed in a fire meant to destroy all evidence of his crimes. Mr. Merrick? The clerk was standing beside the table, her expression unreadable. Find what you were looking for. Jonas quickly closed the file folder. Just some background information about the property. Thank you for your help. But as he started to hand the box back to her, the clerk shook her head. You know what? Why don't you keep that box for a few days? Seems like you have a real interest in local history. Her voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes held a message Jonas couldn't quite decipher. Sometimes it takes a while to really understand what you're looking at in these old documents. Are you sure that's allowed? I'm the senior records clerk here, Mr. Merrick. If I say it's allowed, it's allowed. She glanced around the basement, making sure they weren't overheard. Just be sure to return it when you're finished, and be careful who you share what you learn. Some folks in this town have long memories and short tempers when it comes to old business. On the drive back to the mansion, Owen sat quietly in the passenger seat, the box of documents in his lap. Jonas kept glancing at his son in the rear view mirror, amazed by the boy's transformation over the past week. The quiet, withdrawn child who had barely spoken since his mother's death was now actively helping to solve a decades-old mystery. Owen, how did you know where to find that box? Emma showed me in a dream last night. She said the fire marshal man was scared after he wrote the real report. Some important people came to see him and told him to change his story. But he couldn't throw away what he'd really found, so he hid it instead. Jonas pulled into the mansion's cracked driveway and turned off the engine. Did Emma tell you anything else about these important people? Owen nodded, his expression troubled. She says some of them are still alive, still important in town, and they know we're asking questions. As if summoned by Owen's words, a police cruiser pulled up behind them in the driveway. Jonas felt his heart rate increase as he watched a uniformed officer get out of the car and approach their vehicle. The officer was middle-aged, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd been in law enforcement for decades. Jonas rolled down his window as the officer approached. "Good afternoon, officer. Deputy Sheriff Collins," the man said, his tone professionally neutral, but his eyes alert and watchful. "I heard you folks have been doing some research into local history. Thought I'd stop by and see how you're settling in." "We're settling in fine, thank you." Collins glanced at the box in Owen's lap, and Jonas saw recognition flicker in his eyes. "That's a nice collection of old documents you've got there. Mind if I ask where you found them?" "The town hall. Public records." "Public records, yes." Collins rested his hand on his service weapon in a gesture that could have been casual or could have been a warning. "Thing is, Mr. Merrick, sometimes old records can be misleading. Things that happened 30 years ago, well, memories get fuzzy, reports get filed that maybe don't tell the whole story." Owen spoke up for the first time. "They tell the true story." Collins focused his attention on Owen with an intensity that made Jonas uncomfortable. "Is that so, son? And how would you know what the true story is?" "The children told me," Owen said simply. A shadow crossed Collins's face. "The children, the ones who died here. They want people to know what really happened to them. Collins was quiet for a long moment, studying Owen with an expression Jonas couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, become softer, more human. "Son, I've been a cop in this town for 28 years. I've seen a lot of things, heard a lot of stories, and I can tell you that sometimes the dead don't rest easy when their stories haven't been told properly." Jonas felt a spark of hope. "Deputy Collins, are you saying you believe—" "I'm saying I was a rookie patrolman the night of that fire," Collins interrupted. "I was one of the first responders. And what I saw that night, the way those children had clawed at the doors, the way the locks were engaged from the outside, it's haunted me for 3 decades. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "I've been waiting for someone like you, Mr. Merrick. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain from the truth coming out." He handed Jonas the envelope. "These are copies of the original crime scene photos from that night, the ones that were supposed to be destroyed, but somehow ended up in my personal files." Jonas opened the envelope and immediately wished he hadn't. The photographs were stark black and white images of the mansion after the fire, but they told a story that was unmistakably different from the official account. The dormitory doors were clearly locked from the outside, with keys still in the exterior locks. The children's fingernails had left deep gouges in the wood where they'd tried desperately to claw their way out. "Jesus," Jonas whispered. "I tried to include these in my official report," Collins said, "but my sergeant told me they were too graphic, too disturbing for the official file. He said the families had suffered enough without seeing images of their children's final moments." Collins's voice grew bitter. What he really meant was that certain people in town didn't want evidence that contradicted the tragic accident narrative. Owen had been looking through the photographs with a calm acceptance that surprised Jonas. Now he looked up at Collins. "You've been trying to help them all this time." "I've been trying to sleep at night, son. But every time I close my eyes, I see those claw marks on the doors." Collins looked at the mansion looming behind them. "I've driven by this place 1,000 times over the years, wondering if those children found any peace." "They haven't," Owen said matter-of-factly. "Not yet, but they're not angry. They just want people to remember them properly." Collins knelt down so he was at eye level with Owen. "Son, what you're doing here, talking to these spirits, helping them tell their story, it's dangerous. There are people in this town who have spent 30 years making sure the truth stays buried. They're not going to be happy that you're digging it up." "We know," Jonas said. "Mrs. Hartwell warned us about that. Margaret Hartwell is a good woman. She's been fighting this fight longer than anyone." Collins stood up and looked around the property. "But you should know that as of yesterday there's been some interest in your activities from certain quarters." "What kind of interest?" "The kind where phone calls get made to people in authority positions, questions about your fitness as a parent, suggestions that maybe a man who moves his son into a haunted house and encourages him to talk to dead children might not be providing a stable home environment." Jonas felt cold dread settle in his stomach. "They're going to try to take Owen away from me. They're going to try, but that's why you need to move fast. Get all your evidence together, document everything, and get it to people who can't be bought or intimidated." Collins handed Jonas a business card. "That's my personal cell phone number. You call me day or night if you need help. And Mr. Merrick, trust your son. I've seen a lot of things in my career that can't be explained by normal logic. Sometimes children see things adults miss." After Collins left, Jonas and Owen spent the evening going through all the evidence they'd collected. Emma's journal, Edmund Ashford's confession letter, the suppressed fire marshal's report, and now the crime scene photographs that proved the official story was a lie. Owen sat at the dining room table, creating what he called a story map, a large drawing that showed the connections between all the evidence, illustrated with portraits of the children and scenes from their lives at the mansion. As Jonas watched his son work, he was struck by the boy's focus and determination. "Owen, are you sure you're okay with all this?" I know it's scary dealing with such sad stories. Owen looked up from his drawing. Dad, remember when Mum was sick? How scared I was all the time, and how I couldn't talk to anyone about it because it was too big and too sad. Jonas nodded. This feels different. The children's stories are sad, but they're not scary. They're just important. And for the first time since Mom died, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. Owen returned to his drawing. Besides, I'm not alone. The children are with me, and Mrs. Hartwell believes us, and Deputy Collins is trying to help. It feels like we're building a team. That night, as Jonas lay in his sleeping bag listening to the familiar sounds of the old house, he realized Owen was right. For the first time in months since Sarah's death and the foreclosure and all the desperate scrambling just to survive, he felt like he was part of something larger than his own grief and fear. But he also couldn't shake Deputy Collins's warning about people in positions of authority who wanted their investigations stopped. As he drifted off to sleep, Jonas found himself wondering just how far those people would go to protect secrets that had been buried for 30 years. Outside the mansion, a car drove slowly past the property for the third time that evening, its headlights briefly illuminating the windows before disappearing into the darkness. The children's memorial stone lay hidden beneath 30 years of overgrown ivy and wild brambles in what had once been the mansion's formal garden. Owen found it on a grey morning when the autumn mist hung low over the property, following a path only he could see through the tangled undergrowth. "They're all here," Owen said quietly, kneeling beside the weathered granite marker as Jonas worked to clear away the covering vegetation. Not their bodies, those were buried in the town cemetery with the wrong story, but their real memorial is here. Jonas used a wire brush to clean decades of dirt and moss from the stone surface, revealing names and dates carved in simple block letters. 12 names, 12 ages, 12 lives cut short by Edmund Ashford's murderous greed. At the bottom of the stone, in smaller text, was an inscription: "They deserved better. May God forgive us for failing them." EA 1994. "Even after what he did, he felt guilty," Jonas said, running his fingers over the carved letters. "Emma says he carved this the day before the fire. He was planning to kill himself too, but he didn't have the courage." Owen placed his small hand on the stone. "She says the children aren't angry at him anymore. They're just sad that no one ever told people what really happened." The discovery of the memorial stone marked a turning point in the mansion's supernatural activity. Where before the children's presence had been subtle, whispered voices, cold spots, doors that opened and closed on their own, now their manifestations became more direct and unmistakable. Jonas first saw them clearly 3 days after they found the stone. He was replacing broken window panes in the front parlor when movement in his peripheral vision made him look up. Standing by the empty fireplace was a girl of perhaps 12, wearing a simple white nightgown. Her hair was long and brown, braided in a style from decades past. She looked directly at Jonas and smiled, a sad but gentle expression before fading away like morning mist. "Emma," Jonas whispered to the empty room. Owen appeared in the doorway. "She's been wanting to show herself to you. She says you're ready to see them now." Over the following days, Jonas began to encounter the children regularly. They appeared individually at first, a boy of 10 reading in the library corner where no books remained, a little girl playing with invisible dolls in the nursery, twin brothers who couldn't have been older than 8 sitting together on the staircase landing. They never spoke directly to Jonas, but their presence felt warm and protective rather than frightening. It was Owen who served as their interpreter, translating their silent communications into words Jonas could understand. "Sarah, the little one, wants you to know she's not scared anymore," Owen would say, standing near where Jonas couldn't see anything but somehow knew a child was present. "She says the dark basement isn't dark when you're not alone." Or, "Michael wants to show you where Mr. Ashford hid the money he stole. He says there's a secret compartment behind the kitchen pantry. The children's guidance led them to discover more evidence of Ashford's crimes. The hidden compartment Michael had mentioned contained bundles of cash, payments from the state for children who were already dead, their absence covered up by falsified records. In the attic, following directions from a girl named Lisa, they found boxes of personal belongings that had never been returned to families, items that proved some children had been at the mansion much longer than official records indicated. But the most significant discovery came when Dr. Rebecca Hayes arrived for her scheduled visit to evaluate Owen's psychological state. Dr. Hayes was a child psychologist in her 50s, recommended by the County Social Services Department after Jonas had reached out for help with Owen's behavioral changes. She was a kind but observant woman who specialized in grief counseling for children who had lost parents. "I understand Owen has been having some unusual experiences since you moved here," Dr. Hayes said as they sat in the mansion's front parlor. She'd set up her notebook and recorder on a makeshift table, professional but warm in her approach. "He says he can see and talk to children who died here 30 years ago," Jonas said carefully. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like a child processing trauma and loss in a way that gives him some sense of control and purpose," Dr. Hayes replied. "Children often create imaginary friends or elaborate fantasy worlds to cope with grief. The fact that Owen's fantasies center around other children who lost their lives tragically suggests he's working through his own feelings about mortality and loss." Owen, who had been quietly drawing in his sketchpad, looked up. "Dr. Hayes, what if they're not fantasies?" "What do you mean, Owen? What if I really can see them? What if they really are trying to tell their story?" Owen showed her his latest drawing, a detailed portrait of a girl with kind eyes and gentle features. "This is Emma. She was 12 when she died. She loved to read books and write stories. She tried to save the younger children when the fire started, but the door was locked from outside." Dr. Hayes studied the drawing with professional interest. "Owen, that's a very detailed and emotionally rich portrait. You have real artistic talent. Can you tell me more about Emma?" She kept a diary hidden under the floorboards in her room. She wrote about the bad things Mr. Ashford did to children who tried to run away. She wrote about the night of the fire, when she could smell smoke and tried to get help, but all the doors were locked. Jonas watched Dr. Hayes's expression change from professional interest to something closer to concern. "Owen, those are very specific details. How do you know about Emma's diary?" "Because we found it," Owen said simply. "Dad, show her." Jonas hesitated, then retrieved Emma's journal from their hiding place. Dr. Hayes examined it carefully, reading several entries, comparing the handwriting to Owen's drawing. When she looked up, her expression had shifted again, no longer the clinical detachment of a psychologist, but something more personal and disturbed. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked quietly. "Hidden under the floorboards in one of the upstairs bedrooms, just where Owen said it would be." Dr. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, studying the journal and Owen's drawings. Finally, she set down her pen and looked directly at Owen. "Owen, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Before you moved here, had you ever heard stories about what happened at this house? Had anyone told you about the fire or the children who died?" "No, ma'am. Dad and I didn't know anything about this place except that it was for sale for $1. And you've never researched the history online or at the library?" Jonas spoke up. "Dr. Hayes, we don't have internet access here yet, and Owen hasn't been to the library since we moved in. Everything he's told me about the children he knew before we found any evidence to confirm it." Dr. Hayes looked around the mansion's parlor, taking in the decay and shadows, the sense of weight and history that seemed to press down on everything. "I've been practicing child psychology for 22 years, she said slowly. "I've seen children create elaborate fantasy worlds. I've seen them process trauma in remarkable ways. I've seen them display intuition and insight that seems almost supernatural." She paused, looking directly at Owen. "But I've never seen a child Provide specific, verifiable details about historical events they couldn't possibly know about through normal means. So you believe me? Owen asked. I believe something extraordinary is happening here, whether that's supernatural communication or some form of psychic sensitivity or something else entirely, I don't know. But I believe you're genuinely experiencing contact with something. Jonas felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Having a professional validate Owen's experiences was important, but it also meant they could no longer dismiss what was happening as simple imagination or grief processing. Dr. Hayes, what do we do with this? How do we help Owen handle experiences that are apparently real but completely outside normal understanding? We treat it the same way we treat any other significant life experience. We provide support, we maintain open communication, and we make sure Owen feels safe and protected. Dr. Hayes packed up her notes and recording equipment. But, Mr. Merrick, I also think you should know that word about Owen's abilities is starting to spread. Through town, some people are concerned about a child living in this environment. There may be challenges ahead. After Dr. Hayes left, Jonas and Owen walked through the mansion's rooms as afternoon shadows lengthened into evening. The children's presence was stronger now, more constant. Jonas could sense them even when he couldn't see them. A feeling of being surrounded by watchful, protective spirits who had waited 3 decades for someone to care about their story. Owen, Dr. Hayes is right about one thing. There are going to be people who try to stop us from helping the children. Are you ready for that? Owen stopped walking and looked directly at his father. Dad, for 3 months after Mom died, I felt like I was disappearing, like I was becoming invisible, because the most important person in my life couldn't see me anymore. His voice was steady, more mature than any 13-year-old should sound. But here, with the children, I feel like I matter again. Like what I can do is important and special. He gestured to the portraits covering the walls of their makeshift living space, dozens of drawings he'd made of the children, each face rendered with care and love. These children have been invisible for 30 years. No one remembered their names, no one told their real story, no one fought for justice for them. If helping them means some adults think I'm crazy, I can live with that. Owen smiled, and for the first time since Sarah's death, it was a smile full of hope and purpose. Besides, we're not alone in this anymore. Mrs. Hartwell believes us, Deputy Collins is helping us, and even Dr. Hayes thinks something real is happening here. That night, as Jonas tried to fall asleep, he heard the children more clearly than ever before. Not frightening whispers or mysterious sounds, but the gentle murmur of young voices sharing stories, offering comfort to each other across the decades. For the first time since moving into the mansion, Jonas fell asleep easily, surrounded by the presence of 19 children who had finally found people willing to fight for their memory. But outside the mansion, cars continued their slow patrols of the property, and phone calls were being made to people in positions of authority, people who had spent 30 years ensuring that certain stories remained untold. The original architectural blueprints were hidden inside the mansion's cornerstone, sealed in a copper tube that had protected them from 3 decades of weather and decay. Owen found them by following Emma's guidance to a section of the foundation where the mortar had been deliberately loosened and replaced. Mr. Ashford put these here before the fire, Owen explained, as Jonas worked to extract the tube from its hiding place. Emma says he wanted to keep them safe because they showed his real plans for the building. When Jonas unrolled the blueprints on the dining room table, what he saw made his blood run cold. The plans showed the mansion as it had been built in 1902, but with significant modifications made in red ink, modifications that had clearly been implemented during Ashford's conversion of the building into an orphanage. The most chilling changes involved the children's living areas. The original blueprints showed multiple exit routes from every room, French doors leading to balconies, secondary staircases, windows large enough for easy escape. But the red ink modifications showed these exits being sealed, blocked, or eliminated entirely. The children's dormitory, originally designed with 3 separate exits, had been modified to have only one, a single door that could be locked from the outside. "He planned it," Jonas whispered, studying the deliberate alterations. "From the very beginning, he designed this place to trap children inside." Owen traced one of the sealed exits with his finger. "Emma says this door led to a balcony with stairs down to the garden. All the children knew about it, but one day they tried to use it and found it had been bricked up from the outside. The blueprints revealed other disturbing modifications, soundproofing added to certain rooms, reinforced locks on doors that originally had none, and most ominously, a series of hidden passages that connected Ashford's private quarters to the children's areas, passages that didn't appear on any official building plans. "These secret passages," Jonas said, pointing to the red ink additions. "They're not on the current house. They must have been sealed up after the fire. Emma wants us to find them. She says they're still there, just hidden behind new walls." Owen pulled out his sketchpad and began drawing a map of the mansion as it currently existed, marking locations where the blueprints indicated hidden passages should be. "She says there are things in those passages that people need to see. They started their search in the basement, using Owen's supernatural guidance and the architectural plans to locate discrepancies in the current wall structure. It was Owen who found the first concealed entrance behind a section of modern drywall that had been installed over the original stone foundation. "Here," Owen said, pressing his hand against what looked like solid wall. "There's empty space behind this." Jonas used a hammer to knock small test holes in the drywall, and sure enough, the space behind was hollow. Working carefully to preserve any evidence they might find, he cut away a section of the newer wall material to reveal the original passage underneath. The hidden corridor was narrow and low, clearly designed for secret movement through the building. The walls were lined with the same stone as the basement, but here the stones were covered in scratches and marks. Desperate scratchings that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. "Children hid here sometimes," Owen said quietly as they explored the passage by flashlight. "When Mr. Ashford was angry, when he was looking for someone to punish, they would try to hide in the secret places." The passage led to a small chamber directly underneath what had been Ashford's office. In this hidden room, Jonas found evidence that made him sick to his stomach. Children's clothing, toys, and personal items, along with shackles bolted to the stone walls. "This is where he brought them," Owen said, his voice carrying a terrible knowledge. "The ones who tried to tell people what was happening, he would keep them down here until they promised to be quiet." Among the children's belongings, Jonas found something that connected directly to their investigation. A small notebook containing what appeared to be Edmund Ashford's personal records of his crimes. Unlike the confession letter they'd found earlier, this notebook was detailed and methodical. A complete accounting of every child he'd murdered, how he'd disposed of their bodies, and how he'd covered up their disappearances. 7 children over 4 years, Jonas read from Ashford's clinical notes. State payments continued for average of 14 months post-mortem. Total fraudulent income, $847,000. Bodies disposed in basement furnace room remained sealed behind false wall. The notebook contained other disturbing details. How Ashford had selected his victims, children with no family connections, those who asked too many questions, those who tried to contact the outside world, how he'd manipulated state inspectors and local officials, and most chillingly, his plans for the final solution. "Fire will eliminate all witnesses and evidence," one entry read. "Insurance payout will exceed $2 million. New identity already prepared. South America has no extradition for these crimes." Jonas realized they'd found proof that the fire hadn't been a desperate act of a guilty man, but a calculated murder designed to cover up years of child abuse and fraud while providing Ashford with enough money to disappear forever. "Owen, this is it," This notebook proves everything, the murders, the cover-up, the planned escape. We have enough evidence now to demand a complete reinvestigation. But Owen was staring at the notebook with an expression of deep sadness. Dad, Emma says Mr. Ashford never got to use his escape plan. She says he's still here. What do you mean? She says his spirit never left the mansion either. But he's not. With the children. He's in the dark places, the angry places, and he knows we're getting close to exposing everything. As if summoned by Owen's words, the temperature in the hidden chamber dropped dramatically. Their flashlight beams began to flicker, and Jonas heard something that made his skin crawl. Heavy footsteps moving through the secret passages, getting closer to their location. "We need to get out of here," Jonas said, grabbing the notebook. And pushing Owen toward the passage entrance, they scrambled through the narrow corridor as the footsteps behind them grew louder, more urgent. Jonas could feel a presence following them. Not the gentle, protective feeling of the children's spirits, but something dark and angry and desperate to keep its secrets buried. They emerged from the passage into the basement proper, just as the house above them erupted in chaos. Doors slammed throughout the mansion, windows rattled in their frames, and the sound of breaking glass echoed from multiple rooms. "He's angry," Owen said, his voice steady despite the supernatural tantrum happening. "Around them, he knows we found his records. He knows people are going to learn the truth about what he did." The violent manifestations continued for nearly an hour. Objects flying through rooms, walls groaning as if the house itself was in pain. Cold spots that were so intense they left frost on the windows, even though it was still autumn outside. But through it all, Owen remained calm, protected by the presence of the children who had claimed him as their advocate. Jonas watched in amazement as his son stood in the middle of the chaos, speaking quietly to spirits Jonas couldn't see, offering comfort to the victims while refusing to be intimidated by their murderer. "It's okay," Owen said to the empty air. Around him. "He can't hurt you anymore. He can't hurt any of us anymore. We're going to tell your story, and people are going to listen, and everyone will know what really happened here." Gradually, the supernatural storm subsided. The house settled back into its usual creaks and sighs. The temperature returned to normal, and the sense of malevolent presence faded away. "Is he gone?" Jonas asked. "No, but he's hiding now. Emma says he's always been a coward, even when he was alive. When people stand up to him, he runs away." Owen looked around the basement with new confidence. "Dad, we don't have to be afraid of him anymore. The children are stronger than he is now, because they have people who believe in them." That evening, Mrs. Hartwell arrived at the mansion carrying a pot of stew and a grim expression. She'd heard about the supernatural disturbances from neighbors who reported seeing the mansion's lights flickering and hearing what sounded like construction noise coming from the property. "The whole town's talking," she said as she ladled stew into bowls for Jonas and Owen. "Some people are saying you should leave before something terrible happens. Others are saying you're disturbing the peace of the dead and should be forced out." "What do you think, Mrs. Hartwell?" Jonas asked. The elderly woman looked around the dining room, taking in Owen's drawings covering the walls, the boxes of evidence they'd collected, the sense of purpose and determination that now filled the formerly empty mansion. "I think those children have been waiting 30 years for someone to fight for them. I think you're the answer to prayers I've been saying since 1994. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. "And I think you're going to need this." The folder contained photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. A comprehensive record of everything Mrs. Hartwell had observed and documented about the Ashford fire and its aftermath. "I've been building a case file for 3 decades, she explained. "Every time someone tried to investigate and was shut down, every time evidence disappeared or witnesses changed their stories, I documented it all. I've been waiting for someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated to come forward with new evidence." Jonas looked through Mrs. Hartwell's meticulous records. Photos of the mansion taken immediately after the fire, interviews with witnesses, whose statements never made it into official reports, documentation of how various investigations had been suppressed or misdirected. "This is incredible, Mrs. Hartwell. Why didn't you take this to the authorities years ago?" "I tried, dear. Multiple times. But there are people in this town, powerful people, who have a vested interest in keeping the truth buried. People who were involved in the original cover-up and can't afford to have their roles exposed." She pointed to one particular photograph. In the collection, a group shot of local officials standing outside the burned mansion in 1994. Jonas recognized some of the faces from Owen's drawings. 3 of the men in this photograph are still alive and still in positions of authority in Millbrook: the mayor, the police chief, and the county prosecutor. They were all involved in covering up Edmund Ashford's crimes. And they all have too much to lose if the truth comes out now. Owen had been studying the photograph while they talked. Now he looked up with an expression that was both knowing and sad. "Emma says she recognizes one of them. She says he used to visit the mansion sometimes. He was one of the men who helped Mr. Ashford keep secrets." Jonas felt a chill of realization. Owen, which man? Owen pointed to a younger version of a face Jonas now recognized: Mayor Thomas Whitmore, current head of Millbrook city government, and a man who had held various positions of authority in the town for over 30 years. Emma says he knew what was happening to the children. He knew, and he helped hide it, and he's been hiding it ever since. The hospital bracelet was tucked inside one of Sarah's jewelry boxes, a simple white band with her name, date of admission, and patient number, printed in faded blue ink. Jonas had packed all of Sarah's belongings hastily after her death, shoving boxes into storage without really looking at their contents. Now, 3 weeks after moving into the mansion, he was finally going through her things to decide what Owen might want to keep. He almost threw the bracelet away, just another painful reminder of those final, horrible weeks. But something made him pause. The date on the bracelet was wrong. According to the bracelet, Sarah had been admitted to the hospital 3 months before her official diagnosis, during a time when Jonas remembered her being perfectly healthy and working on a freelance journalism assignment. But the bracelet was definitely hers. Her full name, Sarah Elizabeth Merrick, was printed clearly along with her birth date and social security number. Jonas dug deeper into the box and found more items that didn't make sense. A small digital recorder, a manila folder filled with photocopied documents, and a notebook written in Sarah's familiar handwriting. The notebook was labeled Millbrook Investigation, Ashford Fire Research. With trembling hands, Jonas opened the notebook and began to read his wife's final investigation. Initial contact made through anonymous tip received March 15th, the first entry began. Caller claimed to have information about covered-up murders at former Millbrook orphanage. Agreed to meet at Millbrook Public Library. Jonas read on with growing amazement and horror. Sarah had been investigating the Ashford fire for months before her cancer diagnosis, following leads that had taken her deep into the same conspiracy Jonas and Owen were now uncovering. Her notes detailed meetings with witnesses who had been silenced, former state employees who had tried to report irregularities in the Ashford home's records, and even a former police officer who had been pressured to alter his testimony about the fire scene. "The pattern is consistent," Sarah had written. "Anyone who gets close to the truth about what happened at the Ashford Mansion either stops investigating voluntarily, loses their job, has accidents, or suddenly develops serious health problems. The cover-up is systematic and ongoing." Jonas found the digital recorder and turned it on. Sarah's voice filled the room, weak and strained, but still determined. "This is my final entry, recorded from Millbrook General Hospital, room 314. I've been admitted with what doctors are calling an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer, but the timeline doesn't add up. 3 weeks ago, I was perfectly healthy. Then I met with Edmund Ashford's great-grandson, and now I'm dying." Jonas felt the world shift around him. Sarah's cancer hadn't been random. It had been murder. The recording continued. "Thomas Whitmore is Edmund Ashford's great-grandson. He changed his name and his family history to hide the connection, but I found the genealogy records. He's been orchestrating the cover-up for 30 years, using his positions in local government to suppress investigations and silence witnesses. Jonas paused the recording, his mind reeling. Thomas Whitmore, the current mayor, the man Owen had identified from Mrs. Hartwell's photograph, was Edmund Ashford's descendant, and he had killed Sarah to stop her investigation. He restarted the recording. Sarah's voice was getting weaker. I've hidden copies of all my research in our safe deposit box at First National Bank. Box 247. Key is taped under my jewelry box. If something happens to me, Jonas needs to know that this wasn't random. The children who died in that fire, they deserve justice, and the people who covered it up are still out there, still dangerous. The recording ended with Sarah giving detailed instructions for accessing her research files and a message for Owen. Tell our son that some stories are important enough to risk everything. Tell him his mother was proud to be a journalist, proud to give voice to people who couldn't speak for themselves. Jonas sat in the silence of the mansion, surrounded by Owen's drawings of the children and his wife's evidence of their murder, and felt pieces of a massive puzzle clicking into place. Sarah hadn't died of cancer, she'd been poisoned to stop her investigation. The anonymous tip that started her research had probably come from one of the children's spirits, trying to reach someone who could help them. And the mansion coming. Up for sale just as Jonas needed a home wasn't coincidence. It was the children calling to them, completing the work Sarah had started. Dad? Owen appeared in the doorway, his sketchpad in hand as always. I felt you find something important. The children are excited. Owen, sit down. I need to tell you something about your mother. Jonas explained everything. Sarah's secret investigation, her murder disguised as cancer, the connection to Mayor Whitmore, and the ongoing cover-up. Owen listened with the same calm acceptance he'd shown throughout their supernatural discoveries. But Jonas could see tears gathering in his son's eyes. Mom was trying to help them, Owen said quietly. The children. She was trying to tell their story, and they killed her for it. I think so, son. I think that's exactly what happened. Owen opened his sketchpad to a drawing Jonas hadn't seen. Before, a portrait of Sarah sitting at a desk, writing in a notebook, while ghostly children looked over her shoulder with expressions of hope and gratitude. Emma showed me this in a dream last night, Owen said. She said Mom visited them before she got sick. She said Mom promised to help them find justice, and when she couldn't finish the job, she made sure we would come here to do it for her. Jonas stared at the drawing, seeing his wife's face rendered with loving detail by their son's gifted hands. Sarah looked determined and peaceful, surrounded by the spirits of the children she died trying to help. Owen, this means we're in real danger. If Whitmore killed your mother to stop her investigation, he won't hesitate to hurt us too. I know, Dad, but the children say we're protected now. They say Mom is with them, and they're all watching over us. Owen turned the page in his sketchpad to show another drawing, this one of Sarah standing with the 19 children, her arm around Emma's shoulders, all of them looking directly at the viewer with expressions of fierce protectiveness. They also say it's time to finish what Mum started. They say Whitmore is getting scared because we found so much evidence. He's going to try to stop us soon. As if summoned by Owen's prediction, Jonas's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number. Mr. Merrick, this is Mayor Whitmore. I was hoping we could meet to discuss your situation at the Ashford property. There are some concerns about the safety and stability of your living arrangements. There. Jonas felt his heart rate spike, but he kept his voice steady. What kind of concerns, Mr. Mayor? Well, there have been reports of unusual activities, strange noises, possible structural damage. Some folks are worried about a child living in that environment. I thought perhaps we could find you more suitable accommodations. The town has some programs that might help with housing assistance. That's very kind, but we're quite comfortable where we are. There was a pause, and when Whitmore spoke again, his tone had subtly shifted. Mr. Merrick, I think you may not fully understand the situation. The Ashford Mansion has a troubled history, and people who try to stir up old issues sometimes find themselves facing unexpected difficulties, problems with employment, child custody evaluations, building code violations. It would be much easier for everyone if you simply accepted the town's generous offer of alternative housing. The threat was clear, even if diplomatically phrased. Jonas looked at Owen, who was listening intently to the conversation. I appreciate your concern, Mayor Whitmore, but we're staying where we are. And I think you should know that we've discovered some very interesting historical documents related to the property. Documents that I'm sure the families of the children who died here would find fascinating. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 10 seconds. When Whitmore finally spoke, his voice was cold and hard. Mr. Merrick, I strongly advise you not to go digging up old tragedies. The families involved have made peace with their losses. Disturbing that peace would be unkind and potentially dangerous. Is that a threat? It's friendly advice from someone who's seen what happens to people who don't know when to leave well enough alone. The line went dead. Jonas set down his phone and looked at Owen, who had been sketching throughout the conversation. What did you draw? Jonas asked. Owen showed him the page, a detailed portrait of a man in his 60s, well-dressed and authoritative, but with eyes that held cruelty and desperation. At the bottom of the page, Owen had written Thomas Edmund Whitmore Ashford in his careful script. That's his real name, Owen said. Emma told me while you were talking to him. He changed it when he was 18, right before he started college. But his birth certificate still shows the truth. Owen, we have to be very careful now. Whitmore or Ashford killed your mother. He won't hesitate to hurt us if he thinks we're getting too close to exposing him. I know. But Dad, look at this. Owen flipped to another page in his sketchpad, showing a drawing of the mansion surrounded by dozens of people, adults and children, all holding candles, all looking toward the house with expressions of support and determination. The children say people are starting to remember. People who lost family members, people who suspected the truth but were too afraid to speak up, people who have been waiting 30 years for someone to be brave enough to tell the real story. Owen looked up at Jonas with eyes that held wisdom, far beyond his years. We're not alone in this anymore. There are more people who want the truth than there are people who want to hide it. That afternoon, Jonas drove to First National Bank to retrieve Sarah's research from their safe deposit box. The files she'd compiled were extensive and damning. Genealogy records proving Whitmore's connection to Edmund Ashford, financial documents showing how the cover-up had been funded, medical records suggesting other investigators had died under suspicious circumstances. But the most important document was a letter Sarah had written to Jonas, sealed and dated just 3 days before. Her official cancer diagnosis. My dearest Jonas, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means my investigation has cost me my life. I want you to know that I don't regret pursuing this story. Those 19 children deserve to have someone fight for them, and I was honored to be their voice, even if I couldn't finish the job. I know this will be hard for you and Owen to understand, but I need you both to know that my death was not meaningless. Every piece of evidence I've gathered, every connection I've made, every witness I've interviewed, it's all building toward the moment when the truth finally comes to light. I believe the children's spirits have been guiding this investigation from the beginning. The anonymous tip that started my research, the way evidence kept appearing just when I needed it, the feeling I had of being watched over and protected even as the danger increased, none of it was coincidence. Jonas, I need you to promise me something. If anything happens to me, and if you and Owen end up at the Ashford Mansion, and somehow I believe you will, please don't let my death be the end of this fight. Those children have been waiting 30 years for justice. They need someone with nothing left to lose to take up their cause. Tell Owen that his artistic gifts are special and important. The children will speak to him in ways they can't speak. Two adults trust what he sees and hears. Help him help them, and know that whatever happens, I will be watching over you both. Death can't break the bonds of love, and it can't silence the truth forever. With all my love, Sarah P.S. Check the basement of the mansion. Behind the furnace, there's a section of wall that sounds hollow when tapped. I believe that's where Edmund Ashford hid the physical remains of the 7 children he murdered before the fire. Finding them will prove everything. Jonas sat in the bank parking lot, tears streaming down his face as he read Sarah's final words. She had known she was going to die, known that her investigation would ultimately cost her everything, but she'd continued anyway because she believed those 19 children deserved justice. When he returned to the mansion, Owen was waiting in the front hall with an expression of anticipation and sadness. "You found Mom's letter," Owen said. "It wasn't a question. How did you know?" "She told me you would. She said she needed you to understand why this was so important to her, why she couldn't stop even when she knew it was dangerous." Owen took Jonas's hand. "Dad, she also said to tell you that she's proud of us, proud that we're finishing what she started." That evening, acting on Sarah's final instructions, Jonas and Owen went down to the basement to examine the wall behind the old furnace. Just as Sarah had predicted, a section of the brick wall sounded distinctly hollow when tapped. "They're here," Owen said quietly, placing his small hand on the wall. "The 7 who died before the fire. They're ready to be found now. They're ready for people to know what happened to them." Jonas looked at the wall, knowing that behind it lay the remains of 7 murdered children, evidence that would finally, conclusively prove everything they'd discovered about Edmund Ashford's crimes and Thomas Whitmore's cover-up. Owen, once, "We break through this wall, there's no going back. Whitmore will know that we have proof he can't explain away or suppress. He'll come after us with everything he has." Owen nodded solemnly. "I know, Dad, but the children say we don't have to face him alone anymore. They say tomorrow people will start coming to help us, people who've been waiting 30 years for this moment." "What people?" Owen smiled, and for the first time since finding Sarah's letter, Jonas felt a spark of hope. Everyone who ever loved one of these children, everyone who ever suspected the truth, everyone who's been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to the people who thought they could cover up murder and get away with it forever. Outside the mansion, the autumn wind carried the sound of cars arriving, not the slow, predatory circles of surveillance vehicles, but the purposeful approach of people coming to bear witness to a truth that could no longer be hidden. The Ashford family Bible was bound in cracked leather and secured with a brass clasp that hadn't been opened in decades. Mrs. Hartwell brought it to the mansion the morning after Jonas had found Sarah's letter, carrying it like the precious evidence it was. "I've had this for 43 years, she explained, setting the heavy volume on their makeshift dining table. "Edmund Ashford's housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, gave it to me the day after the fire. She said she couldn't bear to keep it in her house, knowing what it represented, but she couldn't bring herself to destroy it either." Jonas opened the Bible carefully, its pages yellow with age. The front matter contained what Mrs. Hartwell had promised, a complete genealogy of the Ashford family, meticulously maintained through 4 generations. And there, in faded blue ink, was the entry that connected everything. Thomas Edmund Ashford, born April 12, 1962, to Robert James Ashford and Mary Louise Patterson Ashford, grandson of Edmund Charles Ashford, 1894-1994. "Thomas Whitmore is Edmund Ashford's great-grandson," Jonas said, running his finger along the family tree. "He changed his name to hide his connection to the murders." Owen had been studying the Bible's pages with intense concentration. "Dad, look at this." He pointed to a section near the back of the book, where someone had pressed flowers between the pages. But these weren't decorative pressings. They were memorial flowers, each one marking the death of a child, with names and dates written in tiny script alongside each specimen. 19 flowers, Owen counted. 1 for each child who died. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes filled with tears. Edmund kept a record of his victims in the family Bible. Even after what he did to them, some part of him knew they deserved to be remembered. The Bible contained other damning evidence. Financial records tucked between pages, documenting payments to local officials for their silence, letters from Thomas Whitmore pledging to protect his great-grandfather's reputation, and continue paying bribes to keep the truth buried. And most chilling of all, a detailed plan for eliminating future threats to the family secret. Listen to this. Jonas read from one of Whitmore's letters, dated just 2 years earlier. The journalist woman, Sarah Merrick, is getting too close. The hospital contact confirms that the medication adjustments will accelerate the process. Her husband works for the county, easy enough to arrange financial difficulties that will keep him distracted from her research. Owen looked up from his sketchpad, where he'd been drawing throughout Mrs. Hartwell's visit. Dad, Whitmore didn't just kill Mom. He's killed other people too. The children are showing me pictures of all the people who tried to help them over the years. How many people, Owen? Owen flipped through pages of drawings, portraits of men and women of various ages, all with the same expression of determination that Jonas recognized from photos of Sarah when she was working on important stories. 8 people since the fire, reporters, private investigators, social workers who asked too many questions. Whitmore made sure they all had accidents or health problems before they could tell anyone what they'd found. Mrs. Hartwell paled. 8 people murdered to cover up the original 19 murders. Dear God, how did he get away with it for so long? Money and connections, Jonas said, studying the financial records in the Bible. Ashford left his great-grandson a fortune built on stealing from the state and murdering children. Whitmore has used that money to buy silence, manipulate investigations, and eliminate threats. As they talked, more cars began arriving at the mansion. Deputy Collins was the first, followed by Dr. Hayes, then people Jonas didn't recognize, elderly couples, middle-aged adults, even some teenagers who looked like they might be descendants of the original victims. Owen watched the arrivals with calm satisfaction. They're coming, just like the children said they would, everyone who's been waiting for the truth. Deputy Collins brought news that made Jonas's blood run cold. Whitmore has filed an emergency petition with Family Services, claiming you're subjecting Owen to psychological abuse by encouraging his delusions about talking to dead children. There's going to be a hearing tomorrow morning, and if the judge rules against you, they'll take Owen into protective custody immediately. Can he do that? He's the mayor, Jonas. He has connections throughout the county. The family court judge. Harold Morrison has been in Whitmore's pocket for 20 years. Collins looked grim. But here's the thing. Morrison's daughter Emma was one of the children who died in the fire. Emma Morrison, aged 12. Owen looked up sharply. Emma Morrison is Judge Morrison's daughter, his only child. She died in the fire 30 years ago, and he's never gotten over it. If Whitmore is counting on Morrison to rubber-stamp this custody order, he may have made a crucial mistake. Dr. Hayes had been listening to the conversation with growing concern. Mr. Merrick, I've prepared a psychological evaluation of Owen that should help your case. But you need to know that I've received pressure to change my assessment. Anonymous. A phone call suggesting that my professional reputation could be damaged if I continue to support your delusions. You're being threatened too. Everyone who's tried to help you is being threatened, said a voice from the doorway. Jonas turned to see a woman in her 50s, well-dressed but with tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too much sorrow. I'm Patricia Morrison, she said, stepping into the room. Judge Morrison is my father. Emma was my little sister. The room fell silent. Owen stood up slowly and walked over to Patricia, carrying his sketchpad. Your sister wants you to see this, he said gently, showing her a drawing of Emma Morrison that was so lifelike it could have been a photograph. She says to tell you that she's not angry anymore. She's just sad that people forgot about her and the others. Patricia Morrison stared at the drawing, tears streaming down her face. That's her exactly. That's my Emma, just the way she looked when she was 12. She looked at Owen with wonder. How could you possibly know what she looked like? There are no photos of her that age. They were all lost in our house fire the year after she died. She shows me things, Owen said simply. She's been trying to reach your father for 30 years, but his guilt makes it hard for him to hear her. She wants him to know that what happened wasn't his fault. He couldn't have known what Mr. Ashford was planning. Patricia sat down heavily, still staring at the drawing. My father has blamed himself for Emma's death since the night it happened. He was the one who placed her at the Ashford home after our mother died. He chose that place because Edmund Ashford was respected in the community, because the home had a good reputation. Emma says your father is a good man who was fooled by a very bad man, Owen said. She says he needs to stop punishing himself and start punishing the people who are really responsible. You mean Thomas Whitmore? Owen nodded. Emma knows that. Mr. Whitmore has been lying to your father for 30 years. She knows about the bribes and the threats and all the people who died to keep the secret. She wants your father to know the truth so he can finally find peace. Patricia looked around the room at the assembled group. Jonas and Owen, Mrs. Hartwell, Deputy Collins, Dr. Hayes, and the growing number of people who had come to support their investigation. My father is an honorable man, she said slowly. If he knew what Whitmore had done, if he understood that Emma's death was murder, not an accident, he would move heaven and earth to get justice for her and all the other children. Then we need to make sure he sees all the evidence before tomorrow's hearing, Jonas said. Everything we've found, everything Sarah discovered, everything that proves Whitmore is Edmund Ashford's great-grandson and has been covering up mass murder for 3 decades. Mrs. Hartwell stood up, looking around the room with determination. It's time to stop hiding from these people. It's time to make them face what they've done. She walked to the window and looked out at the growing crowd of supporters on the mansion's front lawn. There are over 50 people out there now, family members of victims, former employees of the orphanage, townspeople who've suspected the truth for years. They're not going to be intimidated or bought off or made to disappear. There are too many of us now. Owen joined her at the window, his sketchpad in hand. The children are happy, he said quietly. They say this is the first time in 30 years that they haven't felt alone. Deputy Collins was on his phone, coordinating with state authorities who were finally taking an interest in the case. The State Attorney General's office is sending investigators tomorrow. They want to see all the evidence, including those sealed remains behind the basement wall. We're going to break through that wall tonight, Jonas decided. Before Whitmore can get a court order to stop us, before he can claim we're disturbing a crime scene. Those 7 children deserve to be found, and their remains deserve to be properly identified and honored. As evening approached, the crowd outside the mansion had grown to over 100 people. Someone had brought floodlights to illuminate the property. Others had brought flowers to place at the memorial stone Owen and Jonas had found in the garden. The atmosphere felt less like a vigil and more like a community finally ready to confront its buried shame. Owen spent the evening creating what he called his final testimony, a comprehensive collection of drawings showing everything the children had shared with him. Each portrait was labeled with a name, age, and brief story. Each scene depicted a specific aspect of Edmund Ashford's crimes or Thomas Whitmore's cover-up. These are for the judge, Owen explained as he worked, so he can see exactly what happened to his daughter and all the other children. So he can understand why we had to tell their story. Jonas watched his son work with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. In 3 weeks, Owen had transformed from a grief-stricken silent child to a young man with a mission that transcended his own loss. Sarah would have been so proud. As midnight approached, Jonas and Owen prepared to break through the basement wall that hid the remains of Edmund Ashford's first 7 victims. The crowd outside had remained throughout the evening, holding candles and maintaining a respectful vigil. "Are you ready for this?" Jonas asked Owen as they stood before the hollow-sounding section of brick wall. Owen nodded, placing his hand on the wall one final time. "They're ready, Dad. They've been waiting 30 years to be found. They want people to know they existed, that they mattered, that someone cared enough to look for them." Jonas raised the sledgehammer, knowing that the impact would shatter more than just bricks and mortar. It would shatter 30 years of lies, corruption, and covered-up murder. It would finally give 19 children the justice they deserved, and it would bring Sarah's investigation to the conclusion she had died trying to achieve. "This is for you, Sarah," Jonas whispered as he swung the hammer toward the wall. "This is for all of them." The master key was ornate brass, worn smooth by countless hands over the mansion's long history. Owen found it exactly where Emma had told him it would be, embedded in the cornerstone of the mansion's foundation, placed there by Edmund Ashford himself as a twisted symbol of his absolute control over the children's lives. Jonas worked the key free with a crowbar, while the crowd outside maintained their candlelit vigil. The brass was tarnished green with age, but the key's intricate design was still visible, roses intertwined with thorns, and at the head of the key, the initials EA, surrounded by what looked like children's handprints. "This key opens every door in the mansion," Owen said as Jonas cleaned decades of dirt from the metal. "Every locked door that kept the children trapped, every secret room where Mr. Ashford hid his crimes, every passage he used to move through the house without being seen." They started with the sealed dormitory where Emma and the other 11 children had died in the fire. The door had been locked for 30 years, welded shut by investigators who had been ordered to preserve the scene and then told to forget it ever existed. The master key turned easily in the lock, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo from the depths of the house itself. Inside, the dormitory was exactly as it had been the night of the fire. 12 small beds arranged in neat rows, personal belongings still scattered where they'd been dropped in panic, and on the walls, the desperate claw marks of children who had died trying to escape, but something had changed since the fire. The room wasn't empty anymore. Owen stepped into the dormitory first, his face illuminated by a soft light that seemed to have no source. "They're all here," he said quietly. "All 12 of them. They've been waiting in this room for 30 years, for someone to open the door." Jonas followed his son into the room, and for the first time since they'd moved into the mansion, he could see the children clearly. Not as glimpses or shadows or suggestions of movement, but as complete, present beings. 12 children in nightgowns and pajamas, all looking at Jonas and Owen with expressions of profound gratitude. Emma Morrison stepped forward first, the girl whose diary had started their investigation. She was exactly as Owen had drawn her, 12 years old, with long brown braids and kind eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years. She didn't speak aloud, but Jonas heard her voice clearly in his mind. "Thank you for not forgetting us. Thank you for caring enough to find the truth." One by one, the other children approached. Sarah, age 7, the little girl who had hidden in the basement during the fire. Michael, age 9, who had tried to break down the door with his bare hands. Twin brothers Tommy and Danny, age 8, who had died holding each other's hands. Each child carried with them a sense of their personality, their dreams, their unfinished lives. Owen moved through the group like he was greeting old friends, speaking quietly with each child, showing them his drawings, sharing stories Jonas couldn't hear. But he could see the impact of their communication. Both Owen and the children seemed to grow brighter, more solid, more present. "Dad," Owen called softly, "Emma wants to show you something." Emma led them to her old bed, the small cot where she'd written her final diary entry as smoke filled the dormitory. She pointed to the headboard, and Jonas saw what she wanted him to see. Names carved into the wood, but not just the names of the 12 children who had died in the fire. Carved below their names were 7 other names, older children who had disappeared from the orphanage in the months and years before the fire, the 7 victims whose remains lay hidden behind the basement wall. They carved these names so people would remember all of us, Owen translated, not just the ones who died in the fire, but the ones who died before. They wanted everyone to be remembered together. Emma nodded and pointed toward the door. It was time to find the others. Using the master key, Jonas and Owen opened door after door throughout the mansion, rooms that had been sealed since the fire, secret passages that had been walled up during the cover-up, hidden chambers where Edmund Ashford had conducted his business of child abuse and murder. In each room, they found evidence of the children's lives and deaths, personal belongings that had been hidden from investigators, messages scratched into walls during the victims' final days, and in one heartbreaking discovery, a collection of letters the children had written to family members, letters that had never been mailed because Edmund Ashford had intercepted them all. But the most important door was in the basement, sealed behind a false wall that the master key opened to reveal a chamber that hadn't seen light for 30 years. The room was small and windowless, with stone walls that wept moisture, and a floor covered in what looked like scattered bones. But these weren't just remains. They were the carefully preserved evidence of 7 murders that had been hidden for decades. "They're here," Owen said, stepping into the chamber with reverence. "All 7 of them. They're so happy to finally be found." Jonas could sense their presence now. 7 children who had been buried in darkness for 30 years, their deaths erased from memory by a conspiracy that had claimed nearly 30 lives in total. As Jonas documented the scene with his phone, camera preparing evidence for the state investigators who would arrive in the morning, Owen knelt among the remains and began speaking quietly to spirits Jonas still couldn't see clearly. "What are they telling you?" Jonas asked. "They're telling me about the night of the fire, how Emma and the others in the dormitory knew what was going to happen because they'd seen it happen to the 7 who came before them." Owen looked up at his father with eyes that held the weight of terrible knowledge. "Dad, the children in the dormitory weren't just victims of the fire. They were witnesses to the other murders. That's why Mr. Ashford had to kill them all." The magnitude of Edmund Ashford's crimes was staggering. Not just 19 child murders, but a systematic campaign of abuse, fraud, and terror that had lasted for years. And then 30 years of cover-up, bribery, and additional murders to keep the truth buried. "Owen, we need to get out of here. We need to prepare for tomorrow's hearing with Judge Morrison." But as they turned to leave the chamber, they found their path blocked. Standing in the doorway was Thomas Whitmore, no longer the polished politician, but a desperate man holding a gun with shaking hands. "You couldn't leave it alone," he said, his voice rough with fear and rage. "You couldn't. Just take the house and be grateful. You had to go digging, just like that bitch wife of yours." Jonas stepped in front of Owen, but his son seemed unafraid. If anything, Owen looked at Whitmore with something approaching pity. "Mr. Whitmore," Owen said calmly, "your great-grandfather is here. He's standing right behind you. He's been trying to tell you something for 30 years. Whitmore spun around, waving the gun at empty air. "There's nobody here. There are no ghosts, no spirits, no dead children. Just a disturbed boy and his delusional father." "He says he's sorry," Owen continued, apparently listening to something. Whitmore couldn't hear. "He says he never meant for you to spend your whole life covering up his crimes. He says you were supposed to be better than him." "Shut up," Whitmore screamed. "Shut up with your lies." But Jonas could see the truth in Whitmore's eyes. He could hear his great-grandfather's voice too, could feel the presence of the man whose crimes had defined his entire life. "The children aren't angry at you," Owen said gently. "They understand. That you were scared, that you didn't know how to stop what you'd started. But they say it's time to stop now. It's time to tell the truth and let everyone find peace." Whitmore's gun hand was shaking violently now. Tears streamed down his face as he looked around the chamber, seeing for the first time the spirits that had haunted this place for decades. "I was 18 when he told me what he'd done. Whitmore whispered. 18 years old, about to start college, and he told me I was responsible for keeping the family secret. Said if anyone found out, it would destroy our name, destroy my future. You were just a kid, Jonas said carefully, watching the gun. You didn't commit the murders. You don't have to keep paying for his crimes. But I did keep paying. Every investigation I shut down, every witness I silenced, every person I had killed to protect the secret, it all became my crime too. Whitmore looked directly at Owen. Your mother was a good person. She deserved better than what I did to her. Owen nodded. She forgives you. She says everyone deserves a chance to make things right. For a moment, Jonas thought Whitmore might lower the gun, might finally confess to everything and allow the truth to come to light. But then they heard footsteps on the basement stairs, heavy boots that could only belong to law enforcement officers. Whitmore's expression hardened. They can't find me here. They can't connect me to any of this. He raised the gun toward Owen, and Jonas knew with terrible certainty that Thomas Whitmore was about to add 2 more victims to his great-grandfather's legacy of murder. The Phoenix locket was small and silver, its surface blackened by fire, but somehow still intact after 30 years. As Thomas Whitmore raised his gun toward Owen, the locket seemed to materialize in the air between them, floating at eye level and glowing with a soft, warm light. Emma Morrison's spirit became fully visible to everyone in the chamber, not just Owen, but Jonas and even Whitmore himself. She was no longer the desperate dying child who had perished in the flames, but a presence of strength and protection, her hand extended toward the floating locket. This belonged to me, Emma said, her voice clear and strong in the stone chamber. It was my mother's and her mother's before her. It survived the fire because love survives everything, even death. Whitmore stared at the apparition, his gun, hand frozen in midair. You're not real. You're just guilt and delusion, and I'm as real as the crimes you've spent 30 years covering up, Emma replied calmly. As real as the 7 children whose bones lie at your feet. As real as the innocents you've murdered to protect a secret that was never worth protecting. The locket drifted toward Owen, who reached out and caught it in his palm. The moment his fingers closed around the silver pendant, the chamber filled with light, not harsh or blinding, but warm and encompassing, like sunlight streaming through. Stained glass. In that light, Jonas could see all 19 children clearly. The 12 who had died in the fire stood behind Emma, while the 7 earlier victims rose from their scattered remains to join their friends. They formed a circle around Owen, Jonas, and Whitmore, their faces peaceful but determined. We forgive you, Emma said to Whitmore, all of us. We forgive you for the fear that made you hide our murders. We forgive you for the desperation that led you to kill innocent people. We even forgive your great-grandfather for the terrible things he did. To us, Whitmore's gun was shaking violently now. I don't want your forgiveness. I want you to stay dead. I want you to stay buried and forgotten like you have been for 30 years. But we won't, said little Sarah, the 7-year-old who had died alone in the basement. Because Owen heard us. Because his father helped him listen. Because Mrs. Artwell never stopped believing in us. Because Deputy Collins never forgot what he saw the night we died. The footsteps on the basement stairs grew louder. Voices called out, law enforcement officers who had arrived as part of the state investigation that could no longer be suppressed or redirected. Thomas Whitmore, this is Agent Sarah Chen with the State Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant to search these premises. Come out with your hands visible. Whitmore laughed bitterly. Agent Sarah Chen, even in death your wife keeps causing me problems, Jonas. But Owen was looking at the basement stairs with an expression of wonder. That's not a coincidence, he said softly. The children asked for her. They asked Mom to send someone who would believe their story and wouldn't be scared off or bought off. Indeed, when Agent Chen appeared in the chamber doorway with 2 other officers, Jonas could see why the spirits had chosen her. She was young, determined, and completely unintimidated by either the supernatural atmosphere of the chamber or the sight of a local politician holding a gun on a child. Mayor Whitmore, put down the weapon and step away from the civilians, Agent Chen ordered, her own service weapon drawn, but held low. I can't do that, Whitmore replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Too many people will be hurt if the truth comes out. Too many families will be destroyed. The only person being hurt by the lies is you, Emma said gently. Look at what 30 years of guilt has done to your soul. Look at the person you've become. And Jonas could see that Emma was right. Thomas Whitmore was a broken man, consumed by guilt and fear, twisted into something unrecognizable by decades of covering up crimes he'd never wanted to commit. Owen stepped forward, still holding the Phoenix locket, completely unafraid of the gun pointed at him. Mr. Whitmore, Emma wants you to have this, Owen said, extending the Phoenix locket toward the man with the gun. She says it's a symbol of rebirth. She says even after the worst fires, something beautiful can rise from the ashes. Whitmore stared at the locket, his entire body shaking now. I killed 8 people to keep this secret, 8 innocent people, including your mother. How can there be any redemption for that? Because confession brings freedom, Emma answered. Because truth brings peace. Because the dead can finally rest when their stories are told honestly. Agent Chen moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. Thomas, I've been investigating this case for 6 months. I know about your great-grandfather's crimes. I know about the cover-up. I know about the people who've died to keep this secret buried. But I also know that you were just 18 when this started. You were a victim too, in your own way. No, Whitmore said, but his voice was breaking. I made choices. Every bribe I paid, every witness I silenced, every person I had killed, those were my choices. Owen took another step forward, the locket glowing brighter in his palm. Emma says you can still choose differently now. You can choose to stop the killing. You can choose to tell the truth. The chamber fell silent, except for the sound of Whitmore's labored breathing. Jonas watched his son stand fearlessly before a man with a gun, protected by the spirits of 19 murdered children who somehow still believed in the possibility of redemption. Finally, slowly, Whitmore lowered his weapon. His shoulders sagged. With the weight of 30 years of guilt and fear, I confess, he whispered. I confess to everything. The cover-up, the bribes, the murders, all of it. He looked directly at Owen. I killed your mother because she was going to expose the truth about what happened here. I killed 7 other people over the years for the same reason. I used my positions of authority to suppress investigations and intimidate witnesses. Agent Chen holstered her weapon and stepped forward to take Whitmore's gun. Thomas Whitmore, you're under arrest for multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. But as she reached for the handcuffs, Whitmore looked around the chamber one final time, seeing clearly the spirits of all 19 children who had died because of his family's crimes. Can you forgive me? He asked them directly. Can you really forgive what I've done? Emma smiled, her form beginning to fade as the warm light in the chamber grew brighter. We already have. The question is whether you can forgive yourself. One by one, the children's spirits began to disappear, but not with the sad dissolution Jonas had expected. They faded like morning mist, touched by sunlight, their expressions peaceful and complete. Little Sarah was the last to go, pausing to look directly at Owen. Thank you for helping us tell our story. Thank you for making sure people will remember us. Owen held up the Phoenix locket, which had stopped glowing but remained warm in his hand. They're not gone, he said to Jonas and Agent Chen. They're just finally free to move on. They're finally at peace. Agent Chen finished handcuffing Whitmore, who offered no resistance. There will be a full investigation, she told Jonas. We'll exhume all the remains, identify the victims, and make sure their families know the truth about what happened to their children. And the people Whitmore bribed over the years? Jonas asked. We'll investigate everyone who was involved in the cover-up. This conspiracy ends today. As they led Whitmore up the basement stairs, he stopped and looked back at Owen. Your mother was brave, he said quietly. She knew what it would cost her to investigate this story, but she did it anyway because she believed those children deserved justice. You're just like her." Owen nodded, tears finally coming, not tears of fear or sadness, but tears of completion. "I know, and now they have their justice." Outside the mansion, the crowd of supporters had grown to nearly 200 people. When word spread that Whitmore had confessed and been arrested, a cheer went up that could be heard for blocks. Mrs. Hartwell was waiting on the front porch, her eyes bright with tears of vindication. 43 years, she said, embracing Jonas. And Owen, 43 years I've been waiting for this day. Deputy Collins approached with news that brought the final piece of justice into place. Judge Morrison has withdrawn from tomorrow's custody hearing and recused himself from all matters related to this case. But before he did, he wanted me to give you this. He handed Owen an envelope addressed in shaky handwriting. Inside was a brief note from Judge Harold Morrison. "Owen, your gift has given me back my daughter. For 30 years, I believed Emma died because I failed to protect her. Now I know she died because evil men made evil choices, and that she has been watching over me all this time, waiting for someone brave enough to tell her story. Thank you for giving her a voice. Thank you for giving all of them a voice. Your mother would be very proud." As dawn broke over Millbrook, Jonas and Owen stood in the mansion's garden, looking at the memorial stone where they'd first learned the names of the 19 victims. But the stone looked different now. Cleaner, brighter, as if years of accumulated guilt and sorrow had been washed away. Owen placed the phoenix locket on top of the memorial stone, where it caught the morning light and threw rainbows across the carved names. "It's over, isn't it, Dad? The children can rest now." Jonas put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Yes, Owen, it's finally over. Sarah's investigation is complete, the children's story has been told, and the people responsible are being held accountable. What happens to us now?" Jonas looked at the mansion. No longer a dark and brooding presence, but simply an old house with a sad history that was finally being acknowledged and healed. "I think we stay," he said. "I think we turn this place into something good, something that honors the children's memory and makes sure nothing like this ever happens again." Owen smiled and leaned against his father. "Mom would like that. She always said the best way to heal from tragedy is to help other people avoid the same pain." In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the investigation beginning in earnest. State forensic teams arriving to properly excavate and identify the victims' remains. Reporters gathering to tell the story that had been suppressed for 30 years, and families coming to finally learn the truth about children who had disappeared decades ago. The phoenix locket glowed one final time in the morning sunlight, a symbol of rebirth and renewal, of beauty rising from ashes, of love surviving even death itself. 6 months later, the new deed arrived in the mail on a crisp spring morning, official and legitimate, bearing Jonas Merrick's name as the rightful owner of the property formerly known as the Ashford Mansion. But the house had a new name now, carved in elegant letters on a brass plaque beside the front door: the Sarah Merrick Children's Advocacy Center. Jonas stood on the front porch, holding the deed and watching as workers put the finishing touches on the mansion's restoration. The Gothic towers had been repaired and cleaned, the broken windows replaced with new glass that sparkled in the morning sun. The wraparound porch was solid and welcoming, with fresh white paint and comfortable chairs where visitors could sit and reflect. But the most significant change was in the mansion's purpose. Where once children had been hidden away and silenced, now the building served as a beacon of protection and advocacy for vulnerable young people throughout the county. The insurance settlement from Sarah's murder case had provided more than enough funding for the restoration. Thomas Whitmore's confession had led to a massive federal investigation that uncovered decades of corruption and cover-ups throughout the state. The resulting lawsuits and settlements had generated additional resources that Jonas had dedicated entirely to the Advocacy Center's mission. Owen appeared in the doorway, now 14 and taller than Jonas remembered from their first day at the mansion. The boy who had been silent and withdrawn after his mother's death was now confident and purposeful, his artistic gifts channeled into helping other children process trauma and find their voices. "Dad, Mrs. Hartwell wants to know if you're ready for the dedication ceremony." Jonas looked out at the crowd gathering on the front lawn. Over 300 people had come to witness the official opening of the Sarah Merrick Children's Advocacy Center. There were families of the original 19 victims, whose remains had been properly identified and laid to rest in a beautiful memorial garden behind the mansion. There were social workers and child psychologists who would staff the center. There were journalists and politicians who had helped expose the corruption that had allowed the cover-up to continue for so long. And scattered throughout the crowd were children, current clients of the Advocacy Center, young people who had found safety and support within the mansion's transformed walls. "I'm ready," Jonas said. But first he had something important to do. He walked through the mansion's renovated interior, past offices where counselors met with children, past classrooms where art therapy sessions helped young people express their experiences, past a library filled with resources about healing from trauma and abuse. In what had once been Edmund Ashford's office, Jonas had created a memorial room for the 19 victims. Their portraits, painted from Owen's original drawings, lined the walls alongside their names, ages, and brief biographies that honored their lives rather than just their deaths. Emma Morrison's diary was displayed in a place of honor, along with the other evidence that had finally brought their story to light. But the centerpiece of the memorial room was a glass case containing the Phoenix locket, surrounded by flowers that were replaced fresh every day. A plaque beside the case read, "In memory of Emma Morrison and 18 other children who died seeking justice. Their voices live on in every child we help find their own voice." Jonas stood before the memorial for a moment, feeling the peace that had settled over the mansion since the truth had been revealed. There were no more supernatural manifestations, no more mysterious sounds or cold spots. The children's spirits had found rest, and the house itself seemed to exhale with relief after holding its dark secrets for so long. "Thank you, Sarah," Jonas whispered to his wife's portrait, which held a place of honor beside Emma's. "Thank you for showing us the way." Outside, Mrs. Hartwell had taken her place at the podium that had been set up for the dedication ceremony. At 73, she had become the Advocacy Center's first volunteer coordinator, finally able to use her decades of documentation and investigation in service of protecting children. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Hartwell began, her voice strong and clear, "6 months ago, this house was a monument to secrets and shame. Today, it becomes a beacon of hope and healing." She introduced the speakers who would tell the story of how the Sarah Merrick Children's Advocacy Center had come to exist. Judge Harold Morrison, who had resigned from the bench to dedicate his remaining years to child protection. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, who now served as the center's chief psychologist. Deputy Collins, who had been promoted to detective and specialized in crimes against children. But it was Owen who gave the most powerful speech, standing before the crowd with the same calm confidence he had shown when facing Thomas Whitmore in the basement chamber. "My mom always said that every child deserves to have their story heard," Owen began. "She believed that when we listen to children, really listen, we can prevent terrible things from happening to them." He gestured toward the mansion behind him. "This house used to be a place where children's voices were silenced. Now it's a place where children's voices are amplified, where they're believed, protected, and empowered to heal from whatever they've experienced." Owen pulled out his sketch pad, the same one he'd carried throughout their investigation, and showed the crowd his latest drawing. It depicted the mansion surrounded by children of all ages, all of them smiling, all of them safe. "The children who died here 30 years ago aren't forgotten," Owen continued. "Their story is part of every story we'll tell in this building. Their courage is part of every courage we'll help children find. Their voices live on in every voice we help children discover." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jonas felt tears streaming down his face. Owen had grown from a broken, silent child into a young man who could inspire hundreds of people to believe in the possibility of healing and justice. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Jonas found himself standing with Owen in the memorial garden, where the 19 victims had finally been laid to rest. Their headstones were simple but beautiful, arranged in a circle around a central monument that bore all their names and the words, "They deserved better, now they have peace." Owen, do you ever miss them? The children's spirits, I mean. Do you ever wish you could still talk to them? Owen considered the question seriously. Sometimes, but I don't need to see them anymore to know they're okay. I can feel it in the work we're doing here, in the children we're helping. Every time we prevent another child from being hurt or silenced, it's like Emma and Sarah and all the others are speaking through us. As evening fell over Millbrook, Jonas and Owen walked through the advocacy centre one final time before locking up for the night. In the morning, the building would be full of activity. Counselling sessions, support groups, training workshops for parents and teachers, art therapy classes where children could express their experiences safely. The transformation was complete. The Ashford Mansion had become exactly what Sarah had envisioned in her final letter, a place where children's voices were heard, believed, and protected. In his office, Jonas kept a framed copy of the last letter Sarah had written to Owen, the one she'd sealed with her lipstick kiss. My dearest Owen, if you're reading this, it means I won't be there for all the important moments in your life. But I want you to know that every choice you make to help others, every time you use your gifts to make the world a little better, every moment when you choose love over fear, in those moments, I am with you completely. Love never dies, my sweet boy. It just changes form and finds new ways to heal the world. Love, Mom. Jonas looked out his office window at the memorial garden, where solar lights illuminated the headstones of 19 children who had finally found peace. In the distance, the lights of Millbrook twinkled like stars, and Jonas knew that this town, once defined by its buried shame, was now becoming a place where children could grow up safe and heard. The phone on his desk rang softly. Jonas answered. To find a social worker from the next county over, asking if the Sarah Merrick Children's Advocacy Centre might have room for a 12-year-old girl who had experienced trauma and needed specialized care. Of course, Jonas said. We have room for every child who needs us. That's what we're here for. As he hung up the phone, Jonas heard Owen's voice drifting from the art therapy room, where his son was preparing materials for the next day's sessions. Owen was humming a song Sarah used to sing while she worked, a gentle melody about hope and healing and the power of love to transform even the darkest places into sources of light. The mansion settled into its evening quiet, no longer haunted by the restless spirits of murdered children, but blessed by the peaceful presence of love that had transcended death itself to create something beautiful from something terrible. In the memorial room, the phoenix locket caught the last rays of sunlight streaming through the windows, casting rainbows across the portraits of 19 children whose voices would never be silenced again.